One kind of injury you might see to the terminal growth, particularly twigs of trees and shrubs, is caused not by insects that are chewing on them, but instead that are inserting their eggs into this growth and causing them to fracture or be damaged in the course of egg laying. These are oviposition injuries. Now, a few kinds of insects do this, mostly cicadas, treehoppers, and I'll also mention the tree crickets as being the primary ones that can produce oviposition injuries into trees and shrubs. But this allows us to talk about a very interesting group of insects, the cicadas, that aren't particularly important in terms of tree care, but are associated with trees and shrubs and quite interesting in their own right. Cicadas are the largest insects in the order Hemiptera for the most part, certainly in this part of the world. They develop on the roots of trees and shrubs. The young stages are very slow growing, feeding on the roots, sucking fluid, as other members of the order Hemiptera do. We have some 36 species in the western U.S., or at least the Rocky Mountain West, and some of the ones that we have are indicated here. And we'll talk about a few of them and also show how they developed. So in this part of the country, usually the one that people are most likely to run into, particularly in the foothills and lower forested areas, is Putnam cicada. It is a modest-sized cicada. It's over an inch long in body, fairly large for an insect, and it develops on roots of many kinds of trees and shrubs. The larvae or nymphs develop on the roots of those plants, and after several years, probably in the order of 3 to 5 years, somewhere in there, they become full grown and then dig their way to the surface and then crawl up on the plants. So here we have a nymph that has crawled up on the plant and is in the course of emerging to the adult form. So the skin is split from the nymphal exoskeleton, and the adult is emerging, and I'll show another sequence of pictures of this. But it came out of some hole in the ground where it had earlier been developing for several years. So these would be emergence holes produced by cicada nymphs. Then they crawl up and then shed the nymphal skin and transform to the adult stage. So here's one that has fully extracted itself now from the skin of the nymph, and the wings are being pumped up. It's still quite pale in color. It gets a little darker, gets a little harder, gets a little harder, a little darker, and ultimately become the adult form several hours after it emerges from that nymphal skin. The old nymphal skins of cicadas are left behind from whatever point they rested and the adult emerged from. So we often see this stage. They might stay intact for quite a long period of time after the insect is left, unless they are weathered off or blown off. Now, after the insects emerge, the adults are present and they are going to mate and lay eggs, and in the course of mating, the males will call the females by producing song, and cicadas produce noises to attract mates rather than using pheromones as, say, a moth does. And they can produce a wide range of different kinds of songs. Some are very loud, some are much more subtle, and the sound producing organ is found in the male. Only the males sing. It's called the timbal. It is located on the first segment of the abdomen, and it's a little structure that involves ridges that have another organ underneath it that can click across those, and then a hollow in the body allows it to resonate, and in some cases it can produce extremely high volumes. The loudest of all insects include some of the cicadas that occur in the world. Particularly loud ones are found down in Australia, but we've got some pretty loud ones here in North America as well. And when you hear them loud and buzzing, the question comes up, why so loud? Certainly it seems like to be loud might make one an attractive insect to something that's trying to find it, but what actually happens if you have such a loud amount of song being produced, the ear becomes super saturated. It becomes difficult to find out where is the insect that's actually making that noise. So rather than being attractive, it's actually quite confusing. And it does allow them to call mates from very long distances by being so loud. However, since we're talking about the most common kind of cicada that found in much of the Rocky Mountain region, the Putnam cicada, that actually is one that has a very soft song. It's a slight clicking. It's like clicking two coins together. Very subtle. Something that you might not even notice, or just might just be a little thing in the background. Now, where cicadas come into interest in terms of possibly damaging plants is when they lay eggs. The female of cicadas insert their eggs into plant tissues. The ovipositor, the organ for laying eggs, is quite well developed, quite armored, and capable of inserting itself deeply into twigs, causing a splintering wound. So they will shove the ovipositor in, lay several eggs, move a little bit, shove some more in, and create a series of splintering oviposition wounds. And that is often the primary kind of damage that we'll see affecting the plant. So what happens if you have these kinds of inserted wounds made repeatedly? You get damage to the twig that might be weakening and ultimately may result in the twig breaking. And then when a twig breaks, the leaves dry out, and we'll call it flagging. So you'll get a series of little puncture wounds on the twigs. Now, the eggs are inserted in the twigs, and they will hatch in that site, and then you'll get the nymphs. Then the newly hatched cicada nymphs will then drop to the ground, dig into the soil, try to find a root, and if successful, they will feed on that root and continue to develop over the next 3, 5, maybe close to 17 years, depending on what cicada we're talking about. So these are insects that develop very slowly, feeding on the roots of plants, removing some fluid from the roots of plants, but it is probable that very little damage is done by cicada nymphs. These are not a damaging insect in the nymphal stage that's feeding on those roots, again, because they develop so slowly. On the other hand, the damage that they do cause is quite significant in some cases in the course of laying eggs, when they're ovipositing, and you can get a lot of splintering and then a lot of subsequent dieback beyond the point where they have been inserting those eggs. Just returning to some of the other cicadas we have regionally, there is a group of cicadas that are called dog-day cicadas that are the largest of the kinds of cicadas in the genus Tibicin. Several species occur, and these are the cicadas that generally make the very loud droning sounds that sometimes are quite typical of midsummer. So the dog days of summer have the dog day cicadas droning away high in the trees. Very large cicadas. Again, the nymphs developing on the roots of various trees and shrubs. You might see the nymphs crawling out when they're full grown. So here's one that's full grown, climbing up a cottonwood tree down in Lamar, Colorado, several years ago. And once it sets, and it will then progress to the next stage, the skin will split, the adult will emerge from that, and we will see it extending its wings and then hardening up and ultimately leaving. So we will see a newly emerged adult cicada will be quite pale. Days so later, it's fully darkened and it's off on its own, flying high up in the trees, buzzing away if it's a male, and mating and interspersing mating with egg laying if it's a female. Just one other cicada that is of interest in parts of the deserty areas of the southwest is the cactus dodger. This is associated with the candelabra type of cacti, and it is one that is probably most notable in that it is extremely loud. If you were to disturb this, it sometimes goes screeching off the cacti almost like a jet that is taking off. Very loud regional species of cicada. What is not found in the West, but is the cicada that is best known in most of North America, are the periodical cicadas in the genus Magicicada. These are ones that have a very long life cycle. The most common ones have a 17-year life cycle. Others have a 13-year life cycle. And furthermore, all of them in any one spot are synchronized in their development. So these are insects that will appear periodically, every 17th year or every 13th year. And in some cases, they will emerge in spectacular numbers. So the 17 or 13 cicadas are very well known in terms of their occurrence and are tracked. There's several wonderful websites you could check to learn more about the periodical cicadas, and it is predictable where they will emerge. So, say in 2016, the brood 6 of the 17-year cicada is supposed to come out, and that is in an area of Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. And the next year, if you want to find a 17-year cicada, you got to go to Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. There's a little emergence area there. 2018, the only place you're going to see a 17-year cicada come out is a little spot in New York. Anyway, these are predictable, and in 12 years out of 17, someplace, somewhere in eastern North America, the 17-year cicadas will be emerging somewhere. There's also, again, 3 broods that come out in every 13th year, and these are primarily in the southern U.S. But when they emerge, it is spectacular. There are few things that are so dramatic as a mass emergence of a periodical cicada. They come out in sometimes an enormous number. The males make a lot of noise, and it can be deafening over the course of weeks. So here's a little shot at it. Really not much like it. Again, something you have to travel a little to the east to see, and even there it's only going to occur periodically. Just one little note, sometimes these periodical cicadas are sometimes called 17-year locusts or periodical locusts. That's an incorrect term. Please don't use that. The term locust is appropriately applied only to grasshoppers that bind together and migrate in large numbers. 17-year cicadas are an insect that occurs in large numbers periodically, but they are in a totally different order, feed in a very different way, and it is an inappropriate term. So let's call locusts just grasshoppers that go berserk, and just call them 17-year cicadas or periodical cicadas. Anyway, were you to see it, a few more pictures on this 17-year cicada, were you to see an event, the nymphs emerge from the soil, again, coming out through these holes that they dig in the soil after feeding on the roots of the trees or shrubs on which they've been developing for the previous 16 years. Crawl up, then the skin splits down the back, the adult form starts to emerge, and it will need to puff up to the new size, and the wings will have to fully extend. It might take a day or so for this to happen. It's going to be quite pale for the first little bit, but then hardens and darkens, and then ultimately leaves. And then the old nymphal skins are left behind at the base of the plant, sometimes in enormous number. After that's all done, the adults mate, and the females then go about laying eggs to start the cycle again. So they're going to be inserting their eggs into the twigs of twigs of trees and shrubs, inserting several eggs into each injection, causing some splintering at each point, causing some wounding, producing cicada egg-laying wounds. And here we see the eggs. They're laid in a little double row here. The splintering does cause a weakening that typically will cause the branch to then break at that point. So you see flagging. So twig flagging is indicated on this tree here. It can be particularly damaging to a tree that doesn't have a lot of foliage. So during outbreak years, when periodical cicadas are expected, young trees are sometimes protected by covering them by some sort of cheesecloth or some other kind of netting that will prevent them from inserting their eggs under the twigs until the period of egg laying has passed. Now, only a couple of other insects come to attention in terms of also producing egg laying in twigs. And one of them that is quite a bit less conspicuous, but not uncommon, is a family of insects called treehoppers. And these are found on trees. There's some treehoppers that are also found associated with herbaceous plants as well. They tend to be chunky-bodied insects, and they will insert their eggs in a similar manner to a cicada into tissues of stems. Now, there's a lot of treehoppers out there, although most are not usually common enough to attract attention. But where you don't want to find a treehopper, the best place to look is some kind of oak. Oak supports a great many species, but there's treehoppers on many other plants, and one that is particularly widespread and probably the most common one that causes injuries to twigs that we have concerns with is called the buffalo treehopper, a big chunky-bodied kind of treehopper that has the front end that maybe looks like it's got some horns off the front. It inserts its eggs into twigs. The young stages of the buffalo treehopper, indicated here, actually doesn't feed on trees. It feeds on understory plants, so it's feeding on various kinds of herbaceous plants that will be underneath the tree. But again, the eggs are inserted into the twigs of trees and shrubs, and that produces little slit wounds that may be not normally observed. They may be subtle and have little, if any, real effect on the plant health, or they sometimes become more conspicuous and more common. So in this case, a fair amount of splintering here on some peach twigs caused by buffalo treehopper. And again, whenever they're making a wound, there is the potential for that point to be weaker and more susceptible to breakage, as well as to creating a wound into which certain kinds of pathogens might be able to more easily enter, such as a fungus or a bacterium. And finally, and these are a lot more obscure and less commonly observed, a very different kind of insect that may also produce oviposition wounds are the tree crickets. These are the crickets that you might hear at night making quite melodious sounds in trees and shrubs. Often not seen because they blend in well with the leaves. All of them are green, usually slender-bodied, and again, excellent songsters. But the female, in the picture in the upper part here, has an ovipositor that's fairly long, a little hard to see in this picture, and she uses it to insert her eggs into canes and stems. This is one of the other kinds of insects that can produce an oviposition wound. You might see eggs in a raspberry cane or in a twig. And in the case of this, it'll be a series of round punctures, little holes, each one inserting an egg, and maybe there'll be a little bit of chewed plant matter and feces of the insect plugging it further. Anyway, not a lot of insects produce wounding by the process of egg laying, but some can be quite dramatic in their effects, particularly the cicadas.